Thank you. So even though I am a professor, I'm going to try not to wax professorial to you today. Although really what I'd like to speak about, and when I speak about collaboration, in reference to the blue type up there says challenging the unknown, to me, collaborating with someone is a way to get to know them. And when you know someone, at least in my opinion, you've got a lot harder time throwing bricks or anything else at them, unless they piss you off, than if they're an anonymous, nameless other them and they this and we that. So from the context of, I don't have my clicker by the way, so I won't be able to change the slide. So and since I can't tap dance, I'll thank you very kindly, Eric. Two paths that I would like to examine today in confronting or challenging the unknown: education. You know, we can stumble in as a first-person shooter and blast everything that we don't know about. It might be fun in a video game, but hopefully that's not the path that civilization would take. And increasingly, we have the ability now with these devices that most of us are familiar with, and other devices that have yet to be invented, by using interactive digital media. So today I'm going to attempt to simultaneously go down two paths. First, let's look at education. My question, very simple. What's wrong with 19th century education? Nothing if it's the 18th or the 19th century. There's a little gap between the century we're in now and the 19th century. But I would posit that in education there hasn't been a whole lot of difference in the way we take little people and get them to the point where a lot of you are in college, in terms of having them know what we as their teachers or parents don't know, and what it is we think they're supposed to know to address their future. So the other path that I'll be looking at is interactive digital media. And as the director of the Digital Worlds Institute, we were founded in the College of Engineering on one hand and the College of Fine Arts on the other, which some of you have heard me say that's my bipolar situation. If you use stereotypes, engineers are logical and artists are creative, and that's so stereotypical, which is something that I think we need to break down. So we'll look at those two paths, the early work at Digital Worlds and the stuff that we're doing now. So one of the things that we all learned, those of us that were educated in the Euro-American system, is that people who read books are well educated. But we couldn't have books until we had some type of mechanism to make the books and put the stuff in the books. So who's the guy that invented the typesetting and printing? Everyone knows this. Gutenberg, right. Well, as long as you're a Euro-American kind of person, if you were an Asian, Korean, Chinese kind of person, you would know in the same basic time period in the 1400s, someone in Korea came up with movable type on a wooden block. But of course, since the Euro-American system is the one that we use and is superior, we don't even know the name of this person, right? Well, that's just how it is. So we know that in our civilized tradition, the British and those of us that conquered the world and civilized the savages, et cetera, once we were able to print things through movable type, and we were able to have literature. And of course, if we consumed, that is to say, intellectually, the literature, we became literate. And those of us who could don the cap, you might not be able to see the cap of the distinguished professor there that would walk around in places not unlike this in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, as those who would profess the literature. There's nothing wrong with this, by the way. So don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to in any way demean text or literature, but I'm saying that when we started to put stuff into type and then disseminate it, most of the world was, quote, illiterate. And there was an oral tradition, and that's how we learned things and transferred from grandmother to granddaughter, et cetera, et cetera. Now we had a new system. And previously, it took about 2 years to write a book by hand. We all know about the monks that sat there and copied Bible or whatever other literature. But by the time the printing press was invented, and then in England, they had their first printing press, within a couple years, they were able to print 300 copies of the same thing. Within a couple more years, thousands of copies of the same thing. Increase in literacy happened as literature was available. This is all good, right? Everybody wants to be literate, civilized, etc. So pretty soon science and religion were among the favorite topics that went into print. And by 50 years later or so, there were more than 1,000 printing presses across Europe, each turning out thousands of editions of the same thing. And if you got one of these things and read it, learned to read, everybody would study and know the same thing. And then, of course, if it's in print, it's true. Sort of like in the 20th century, if it's on television, it was true. And so, therefore, by the time this spread throughout the civilized world, if you had a book back in the early days, let's say the 1480s or the 1490s, you were as cool as somebody in the 1980s or 90s that had a cell phone. Well, think about that. Right now, it's like everybody, if you don't have one of these things, what's the matter with you? These things are not, at least in my opinion, telephones. These are handheld media computers that have the power to hold the equivalent of thousands, if not tens of thousands of books, except they have another advantage that we'll talk about in a moment that books may or may not give us. But however, let's imagine that this picture was taken in the 20th century, which in fact it was. I would challenge you to tell me what's different about this picture taken in 1950 than 1850, except maybe there would be electricity in the room. Not a whole lot. It's the same method. We have the books. You sit there, you study the stuff. If you remember everything on the test, you get an A. If you don't get a good grade. And if you can't get out of this one, you don't go to this one. You'll never get to college, blah, blah, blah. That system seems so 19th century. Now, as a human species, we're certainly the most advanced on the planet. We know that. Why? We've read about it. We've been told that. It's got to be true. As a matter of fact, we've evolved so completely that now we have these things in our pockets. Of course, at the time when this slide was first made, we evolved so much that a lot of us who always worked on these devices seem to get kind of stationary. So this is a great development, mobile computing. However, a lot of what we do with it really, in my opinion, is using a development of virtual reality, even though it's not in the same sense that we use at the research university. However, with virtual reality, because it's a time-based phenomenon, which we're used to in video games, movies, etc., instead of a fixed quanta like text would be in a book, it allows us to visualize extremely complex data sets or scenarios. So simulation or animation is what I still consider to be a virtual environment. So this is an attempt, an early primitive attempt in my opinion, to wed the classroom with virtual reality. But it's like putting horse reins on the space shuttle. We're using a paradigm from a previous era and mapping it onto something new. I have noted that when we had first automobiles, they didn't have steering wheels, they had reins like a horse to drive these cars because the steering wheel hadn't been invented yet, but we knew how to drive a horse. So this is using virtual environment by modeling a 19th century classroom in VR. Doesn't quite seem appropriate. Now this is some work. I was at Georgia Tech before I came here. You might not be able to see this, but there's a person who happens to be me sitting inside an experience of a cathedral in the Santiago de Compostela. So instead of reading about the cathedral, we can go in there and I can just use what you're used to now in a game environment to move and explore the environment at my own pace. And I can see what it would be like to walk up the stairs, the relationship, the symmetry of the building, the three-dimensionality of it, the human scale of it, and maybe appreciate also the sounds and the experiential relationship with that being studied. So again, in the same way that I said what we just saw about the classroom was sort of a primitive use of VR in education, this is from a lab that we built here at UF in 2002, which is, almost back in the 20th century. However, this kind of thing is very common now in video games, right? except usually you have a gun attached to the experience, or a lot of people, right? Sorry, but there were no guns allowed in the cathedral. So one of the things that we're starting to do now is realize that immersion in an experience leads to an enhanced quality. If you're just sort of looking at something like this, or poking around, or not paying attention to it, you're not going to retain very much about what it is that happened. Now, for those of us who have to get through education on the way to a higher degree or have a body of knowledge, we would have to retain something. So not all of us are great readers. I rather look at the pictures. Some of us like to listen to sounds and stories. Some of us do like to read. There's nothing wrong with it. Don't ever get me wrong. I'm not saying text reading is bad at all. But it's just one modality. And we have the power now to use all modalities of this thing that we're walking around in, the body. And if you ever watch little kids play, before they're even educated, they are collaborating at a high level. They are co-creating in real time. They're doing stuff that's so imaginative that what are you guys doing? Oh, we're, whoa, okay. Okay, come on, time to go to school. So what would happen if we were able to empower collaboration, creativity, immersion, and retention in the classroom? Well, no, we couldn't do that, because you have to turn off this stuff when you come to school. This is some of the stuff we've done at Digital Worlds.
Digital Worlds Institute has been pioneering globally distributed arts collaborations since Dancing Beyond Boundaries united performers in North and South America over the Internet too in 2001. Our most recent work premiered for SIGGRAPH 2005 in the Emerging Technologies Showcase, demonstrating new tools for the Access Grid. The Access Grid allows multiple remote performers to see, hear, and interact with each other in real time. Our SIGGRAPH piece was entitled In Common Time, and it united participants in 7 cities across 5 continents in a real-time collaborative performance. The top 1/3 of the screen shows standard Access Grid windows. Montage 2 shows the same windows automated into graphical overlays. Montage 3 shows the SIGGRAPH premiere with performers in Los Angeles. Digital Worlds has created new software to automate the movement of Access Grid windows, controlling the individual placement of all camera views as part of the live performance. Another Digital Worlds innovation is the metronome, a tool that automatically compensates for divergent network latencies, allowing musicians separated by over 40,000 miles to be joined together, quite literally, in common time. Working with research and production partners at institutions around the world, we continue to refine our collaborative tools and techniques. Our goal is to bring performers, both young and old, together with artists, educators, researchers, and engineers to bridge classrooms, continents, and cultures.
So that was from 2005, and one of the things for me that was unique about that is instead of just having university students and faculty involved, we had people from age 6 to 60-something from all around the world working together on something, creating a global scale virtual environment, collaborating at a high level, doing music, telling their stories. And so it seemed to me that the current work that we were moving towards ought to incorporate more than just people at a university. I mean, as a research university, of course, we have to, work with our students and faculty, but not everybody is going to be able to get into the university for reasons I alluded to earlier, because of their education, if you take my meaning. If they're not able to pass the test to get from this level to this level to this level, we wouldn't let them into UF. Well, that may or may not be good. I'm not going to pass value judgment because I do enjoy my day job. However, this is our classroom. And in this particular environment with 50 people, this particular day we're taking a tour of the University of Florida campus. It's a simulation of fly through a virtual environment. It needs artists, engineers, programmers to put the whole thing together. So we started thinking, well, we ought to have this in every classroom, not just in America, but that would be a good start, so that what the students and the teachers and the people are experiencing can be dynamic, can still use text and traditional models. So we adopted one of, if not the most under-resourced elementary schools in this county. Is on the wrong side of the tracks, if you take my meaning. Unfortunately, that still happens to this day. And we built a smaller version of our classroom over there in their elementary school. Our associate director, Chris Tassin, and his dad and some other folks went over there, and we got permission, sort of, from the principal to take an old 1960s classroom and build a miniature version of what we have at Digital Worlds. So we called it the Super Classroom Theater, and combines elements of theater, virtual environments, etc. And so now you can have a hard time seeing this, but this little kid, little guy right here, whoops, I pressed the wrong button. That little guy is using a haptic mouse, meaning he can actually feel what's going on inside of the virtual environment. And we're creating an environment that helps fifth graders learn about the relationship between the size of the planet down to the relationships of atoms and molecules. Right down here, one of the questions on this is, what force do you feel when you approach the mitochondrion? I mean, just ask any fourth grader that. They'll be able to talk about it. But they can also tell you what the mitochondrion feels like in this environment. So we're creating stuff like this in the classroom that's experiential, that we'd like to help the United States of America, but not just exclusively, other countries and peoples to be able to continue the development in what we call the STEM areas. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are arguably what built this country and our standard of living after the First World War and helped us to distinguish ourselves in the global marketplace. However, that is eroding, as in going downhill. Anybody ever hear of the Roman Empire? Connect the dots. We are not the center of the universe, at least not forever. And so one of the things that we feel that we can do at Digital Worlds, because we're working across different colleges at UF, is we added the arts and design component into that, and we created the STEAM Learning Network. And these are some kids from the most under-resourced elementary school in this county that we brought them together, formed the STEAM team. They performed here at UF last year. We just came out with the Lastinger Center for Education with a DVD album that features the techniques of a fifth grade math teacher that was able to get them out of their chairs, moving, using a multimodal approach, and we created the hip-hop math. It has both print materials, DVDs, etc. This is a little clip from their performance. If you want to see more, you can check out the YouTube link.
Now 5, 2.
2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24.
What?
20, 22, 24.
Count by 3.
3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30, 33, 36.
What?
30, 33, 36.
Count by 4.
4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, 44, 48. 40, 44, 48.
Count by 5.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. 50, 55, 60.
Count by 6.
6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, 42, 48, 54, 56, 70.
And they got more of that stuff. I mean, these guys are doing, geometry and a bunch of stuff that I was like going, oh yeah, how did they remember that? They're remembering that because they're immersed in it, they're doing something, they're using all of their bodies, they're not sitting there going, oh, I had to remember this to take it on a test. So that's one thing that we're trying to do in education by putting arts. I mean, this is music and movement, which you don't usually find in a fifth grade math class. However, it helps get results. So the final notion of what we're talking about is how do we distribute this? If this happens just in one school, in one place, it's not going to make a major difference. So we have the power now of the network to bring things and people from around the world. A recent thing that we did just last year in Vancouver at a concept called Connecting the Edges is we created a piece that brought together people in Korea, Japan, New York, and Florida, epicentered in Vancouver, that we created a shared virtual environment. So we designed the experience to use color so that we could always tell the live human. We're not using video, we're body scanning people 360 degrees in real time with no wires or markers. And then we created an environment to where this is a dance instructor here, Kristen O'Neill, over at Digital Worlds. And if you can see, there's 4 humanoids up there on the screen that she's watching. Each of those are real people in real time in different parts of the world being 360 degrees scanned into a shared virtual environment where they can play, interact, etc. So we are going to play just a short thing here. These people are in Tokyo and New York, but they're in that shared environment, and that's their perspective on the bottom. They're playing musical instruments that don't exist. You've heard of air guitar. They're playing air cubes and other types of geometry. But they're in the same coordinate space, even though their bodies in real time are in 2 different continents. So this is one part of the piece that we just showed. Now, I'm thinking that this kind of stuff, again, this is research, this is not art, this is not necessarily mathematics. We brought the 4 people together, and now in real time they're seeing each other doing, when this is edited down, they're flying. They'll get the feeling in their own body space of flying, and when they cross each other in the shared coordinate space of VR, you'll hear a sound and see what we call a particle system that indicates that they have crossed in the virtual space. So now, imagine if you were trying to learn about something in a classroom, but you could do it with people from around the world, maybe have a good time while you're doing it in a shared virtual environment. So we're looking at maybe how we can apply some of this kind of stuff into standard education for young people. So, once again, this is 2 shots of our classroom over at Digital Worlds. It's hard to see. The top one is a panoramic of the virtual College of Law that we built virtually for the UF College of Law, and they have instructors from all over the world give lessons to the lawyers here. And the bottom is some folks from the entrepreneurial program that came over, and we were doing some music visualization. So I'm hopeful that the work that we're doing here can help ameliorate, that's my professorial word for the day, ameliorate what science fiction writer William Gibson said about the future not being equally distributed. As what we used to call third world countries and others have these things in their hands, these are powerful tools for education. We just have to put the content and in the engagingness and use them every day in the classroom instead of asking students to turn them off when they come to get educated. Thank you.